Hi, my name is Drenk. I'm 17 years old, and this is the first installment of the Drenk Angle. This is a conservative political podcast I'm starting. So, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed it. Today, I wanted to talk about something that has become just so utterly controversial and so loud throughout the nation, and that's guns. And with that, the laws that need to be made, the changes that need to be made, and the solutions we need to have to stop these mass shootings that are happening, and especially since we've just experienced multiple. There's actually been two in the past couple of weeks alone. So in these past few weeks, you've probably seen. There's two things I want to talk about, and you've probably seen or heard about both. The first one being the school walkouts that have happened in middle school and high school throughout the country, and the second being the March for Our Lives, which just recently happened right after the school walkouts. So with the walkouts, if you aren't familiar, or if you are, the walkouts were young children aged, some middle schools up to high school, so middle school ages 11 to 12 up to 14, high school up to 18, and these students were basically permitted to leave class or lunch, depending on when the school allowed it, to go outside and protest. I have a few problems with this because the the walkout was based on two issues. One being it was the to show support for the 17 victims and their families and the people that were lost in the Parkland shooting, and that I agree with greatly. I think that we do need to show love and respect to these people. They lost their loved ones, and that's great. But I disagree with them using it in a walkout because it was almost a scare tactic, and by that I mean people who didn't go out and people who didn't walk out, myself included, were kind of bashed because it was they make it seem like a morality issue, like you didn't walk out, well, you don't support the 17 victims. Well, the other half of the walkout, and the part that actually the reason the walkout started, was to basically say that the solution to these mass shootings is more gun control. We need to get rid of guns, or at least some guns, make it harder to get them. And me, along with many other people, we don't think that's the issue. So that created even more controversy in a way. And I also think that these walkouts were illegal. 100% they were illegal for certain ways. Public schools are not allowed to reward a certain partisanship. They're not allowed to basically offer something to a certain group of students based on what they believe over another group of students, whether that be politics, religion, anything. And what this walkout did was it almost rewarded the idea that we need more gun control. And those students walked out of school, and it was allowed and permitted. And these kids were not marked truant. While in the United States, if you're not checked out of school for medical reasons or with parent consent, it's truancy. These students were not. And there was no alternative offered. There was no conservative side where kids were allowed to ask for armed school resource officers or any other form of protection that they see as the solution to these shootings. That was not allowed. So this is why I see this as majorly illegal, and that's a problem. Schools cannot ease students towards a certain partisanship or towards a certain side on an issue. So, and whether that be Republican or Democrat, I wouldn't be okay if the school did an anti-abortion walkout, if a march for life, if a school allowed this but did not allow some sort of political discourse for students who are pro-choice, that would be equally as illegal and equally as wrong. Schools should not be allowed to host a pro-Trump rally or a pro-Hillary rally or whoever runs in the next election. There should not be a single partisan rewarded issue or an event that discludes the other option. There are certain. I don't agree that all political action should be taken from school, though. That's different. High school students should be educated on politics and should be allowed to voice their opinions. By this I mean clubs, for example. At my school, a friend of mine who was a senior at the time, I was a sophomore, we started this conservative club where we met in a teacher's room at lunch, and it was great. We had one of the biggest groups on campus, and it didn't exclude anybody. Anybody could come. We didn't ask you what party you were. It was for political education, for fun for our group. And a friend of mine the next year asked me, he was like, okay, should I start this group? He ended up doing it. He started a Democrat club, and we held debates. That is great. Political action is great because that did not disclude anybody from doing the same on the opposite side of the aisle. Another example of political action that I agree with on schools, by the way, is my school, along with a lot of other schools, offered pre-registration to vote. So at the age of 16, when you were probably a sophomore or junior, or however old you are in high school, you were allowed to register yourself to vote so that when you turned 18, you were ready to vote. And that's great because you were allowed to register to any party that did not ease you towards a political aisle by rewarding you. It was just preparing us to take political action in the future, and I agree with that greatly. I think it's awesome. This walkout was nationwide, and students that opposed it or walked out holding signs that gave opposite opinions were bashed. A friend of mine that goes to a school nearby, he had a sign that said, "Guns do not kill people, people kill people," and basically saying that we shouldn't blame the gun. His sign was taken and torn, and the student that did it wasn't punished. So that's my issue. And the whole walkout was a pretty big deal nationwide. But then the walkout on steroids came by, and that was the March for Our Lives. This just happened. It had so much celebrity support because we all know that celebrities and actors in Hollywood movies are experts on guns and political discourse. So those are the people we need to be listening to, of course. Um, Hundreds of thousands of people took part in this, and basically the march was to get rid of guns. And I'm not saying that everybody that marched wanted to outright ban guns. I don't think that's true. But what I have seen in a lot of videos and a lot of people that I know that even drove to LA. I live in Southern California, to LA to interview these people, or that they went to march. They would say, "I'm okay with getting rid of all guns, handguns, anything." It's the uneducatedness of these people that I have a problem with. I have no problem with opposing views. If we go back to the walkout, when I actually went to talk to some of the people, some that I was friends with, some that I didn't know, some adults that showed up to show support for it, I kind of asked them. I wanted to know what they believed, why they believed it, etc. So one example was a girl had a sign, and I didn't know her, but I asked her. I said, "Well, explain this to me." Her sign had a picture of an AR-15, and under it said AR-15, and then above it said, "We should ban assault rifles. They are dangerous." And I said, "Well, you're not claiming that AR stands for assault rifle, are you?" It doesn't. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know this until just recently before it. So AR actually stands for Armalite rifle. Armalite is a military term that refers to usually a larger weapon that has the capability of holding a larger magazine, but it is not an assault rifle. And she said, when I told her this, and she didn't know, she said it was either assault rifle or automatic rifle. When I told her this, she at first told me it was wrong, Googled it, I wasn't, and then she said, "Well, it's just a nicer way of saying the same thing, you're just sugarcoating it." And I said, "That's not true. Armalite and assault are two different things." The example I used was I was holding a binder. I said, "This is a binder, right? If I carry it and use it for schoolwork, it stays a binder. But if I was to take this, it has a metal piece in it on the corner. If I was to take this and hit somebody over the head with it, and that caused that person harm, gave them a concussion, or even killed them, then it becomes an assault weapon. Same goes for a gun. If it's used for self-protection, for hunting, for shooting at a range, it is not an assault weapon. But the second it is used to harm people, students, anybody, then it becomes an assault weapon." Another example of a sign that I saw was a student that had a sign that said, when is my vagina going to have the same rights as your guns?" And I wanted to ask her what this meant, because honestly, that's as extreme as it gets. There were two types of signs. I saw some really radical signs and just some signs that were for political action, which is fine. But this sign, I talked to her, and I said, "Well, what do you mean? Where does you having a vagina give you less rights than a gun?" She said, "Well, this means that we have people in Congress and our president, and they support protecting gun rights more than protecting women and advancing women." And I said, "Okay, well, guns aren't allowed in places of voting and government buildings and schools and other public places. So what do you mean? Where is your vagina not allowed?" And she said, "Well, that's not necessarily what I meant." So I kind of took a step back and I said, "Okay, what did you mean?" And she kind of explained the same thing to me about Congress supporting guns and etc. And the government. And I said, "Well, where do women need advancing just to get more?" And she said, "Women don't make as much money as men." And that's my favorite feminist argument, because it's absolutely a myth. If you look at you can look on census.gov and actually throughout the UN, and you can find salaries for men and women, and they are different. But what it doesn't say, women graduate college more than men. More women graduate from universities than men do today. However, women dominate fields that have lower salaries, those being psychology, education, etc. Men are dominating the fields such as engineering, sciences, maths, these new booming fields, computer science, aerospace, that have the highest salaries, medical, and that's why they typically make more money later in life. But up until age 30 or 35, the number changes. I'd say it's between those two. The most common being 30, women make more. The thing that changes that is usually marriage, the bearing of children, families, and then women begin to work part-time. Part-time workers make less than full-time workers, which are typically male. And we explained this, and she was on her way. And I don't want to get too into that because this is more about guns. Another sign I saw, and I saw a lot of these, and I'm sure you've heard it through the hashtags and on the news and whatever, was never again, or another one being what if I'm next. And those two basically, they're close to the same. And I talked to these people, and they said, well, it's more of a I don't feel safe thing. We need to make us feel safer, and that was fine. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Most of them don't understand the gun laws that are currently in place where they live. I live in California. The gun laws here are completely different. They said, well, I think that people should not be allowed to have fully automatic weapons. And I said, well, in California, you can't. People should not be able to have these high magazine weapons. Again, in California, you can't. You can't have a gun that has more than 8 bullets at a time, whether that be a handgun, a rifle, anything. It can't have more than 8 bullets. It cannot be fully automatic. And they said, well, isn't it too easy to get them? It's not. It takes 2 weeks. You have to get a background check and identity verification, social security, all of that. These people don't know the current stages it takes to get a gun. And in many states it's similar. Some states it's more lax, like in Arizona, or even a Democrat state like Oregon, concealed carry and larger magazines are allowed. But they're just not educated on what it actually currently takes. Yet they're writing letters to local representatives, the most common being our district representative, Ken Calvert. But they don't understand what the current law is. So if you don't understand what's currently in place, you're not going to be able to accurately ask for change. You're not going to be able to outline what you really want if you don't know what you already have. And that really bothers me. People need to educate themselves on what's in place, then they need to find solutions. And then back to the March for Our Lives. So the champions of the March for Our Lives were the survivors of Parkland. The two of them, to be specific. There really is a gang of 4, but the two that I focus on mainly are David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez. She's the one with the shaved head, the fascist statement. Anyway, one thing that I disagree with these two is their promotion of communism. David Hogg throwing his fist into the air, promoting socialist laws and ideals. Emma Gonzalez more explicitly is doing so by showing flags of Cuba, who we all know Cuba's communist policies have worked, right? When Fidel Castro came to power, millions fled, and that happened for decades. She was also seen with flyers and shirts and everything showing the hammer and sickle, the famed communist symbol, and advocating for the banning of all guns, right? Asking people, and they say they're completely okay with the complete and utter whiting out of our Second Amendment. Emma Gonzalez even had a video that's gone viral of her holding the Constitution almost proudly and then tearing it in half. So this document that has guaranteed us freedom, a guaranteed equality to everybody, all races, all genders, everything. The Constitution that laid out one of the greatest nations to ever grow in the world, one of the most economically and socially sound countries. The amount of freedom, the amount of just everything that the Constitution guarantees her, regardless of what she does, and she tears it, and that bothered me a lot. There's two different kinds of action. There's this radical action of doing something like that, and then there's asking for change. There's a difference, and that bothers me a lot. That's just not how you ask for change. And there are so many flaws in this kind of argument. It's so dogmatic in that their whole argument is it's my way or the highway. This is what we need to do. There is no alternative. There is no a better solution than banning guns and promoting this type of government and almost erasing the complete and utter democratic republic of the United States of America. So that was awful. Another flawed argument made, and this is one of my favorite quotes by Mr. Hogg, David Hogg, was that the United States government is the bitch of the NRA, and I quote, bitch of the NRA. And by that he's basically saying that the NRA has control over the government. Well, to that I say, that's not true. The NRA is not completely funded. It's funded by its members. It's not completely funded by the U.S. government. I'll give you an example of something that is funded by the U.S. government, and that's Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion company in the United States. They're funded completely by the U.S. government. But what I find funny is that the Constitution does not guarantee you a right to abortion. It does say that abortion is allowed currently. I disagree with abortion, but that's another topic. It does say that you are allowed to go and pay a doctor to get an abortion. It does not guarantee you the right to an abortion paid by taxpayer dollars. What the Constitution does guarantee you, though, is the right to own a gun. The right to own a gun, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Yet, one of the largest actually, gun advocacy and legal gun ownership groups in the country, the NRA, is under fire. That brings me to the next topic, just the NRA in general, which I've always kind of questioned since I was younger. In elections, the gun issues are huge, and I understand that, but I question why the NRA comes under fire. Why the NRA? Well, the NRA is just a legal gun ownership group. It's people that own rifles or handguns at anybody, and they pay to be members of this group. And I've never understood what was wrong with that. These people aren't the people that are going in mass shooting. These aren't the murderers with guns. The shooter in Parkland was not a member of the NRA. The shooter in Maryland that happened just after was not a member of the NRA. These mass shooters, all of the murders in Chicago, they're not members of the NRA. In fact, if you look at the NRA, which, and I asked people again when I saw a sign that said NRA with a big circle across through it, no, ban the NRA, get rid of the NRA. Well, when I saw this, I asked them, well, do you know what the NRA stands for? I only saw one person. Do you know what the NRA stands for? And they said, well, no. Well, they took a few guesses. The National, no, and they didn't know. And I said, well, you were right with the first one. It's National Rifle Association. That's what it stands for. They didn't know. And I said, well, why do you want to ban it? And they said, because it promotes the ownership of these guns. And I said, well, I mean, it promotes gun rights, yes, but, and this is why that bothers me. If you look at the national average of homicide, of gun owners and killing people, the national homicide averages, and then the percentages of the NRA, it actually goes down. A lower percentage of NRA members commit gun crimes than the other national average. So why are they under fire when the people that are part of this group are less likely to commit a crime than people who aren't? That's my problem with completely blaming the NRA. Mass shootings do not come from these members. These members aren't committing crimes like the rest of the country, so I have problems. With guns aren't the issue, just whether NRA or not. So, for example, according to the Congressional Research Service, and I'll always try to back up my facts in these videos so that I'm not spewing numbers at you that may or may not be real. No. And you can always check these. The Congressional Research Service of the United States recorded that between 1993 and 2013, this 20-year period, the number of guns in America in the United States increased by 56%. In that exact same time, from 1993 to 2013, the same group measured that gun homicides, killing with a gun, went down 49%. It's almost linear. More guns in the United States, there were less homicides. People are allowed to protect themselves. This is why I don't see guns as the issue. Again, according to the Crime Prevention Research Center, gun-free zones are the target of 98% of public mass shootings. Mass shootings in public areas are more than 98% of the time in gun-free zones. These zones where guns are not allowed. And just think, this is the metaphor that I ask people to envision. You close your eyes. You're now an adult with children. If you already are, then great. You have two options for a school to send your child to. They both have a sign outside. These are both great education-wise, but they both have a sign. School A has a sign, and that sign reads, "This is a gun-free zone. No guns allowed on campus." The second sign reads for School B, "Armed security on campus. Any attempt to harm children will be met with deadly force." I'm definitely sending my child to School B. I hope you are too. If there are armed people on campus ready and trained to protect your child, you can rest easy that they will be protected. They have way better odds of being safe than at a school where nobody's there to protect them when somebody who's mentally ill and got their hands on a gun wants to hurt them. And the whole argument that you can walk in and buy a gun, I've debunked that with the gun laws that are already there. Criminals will get guns. My example being the Maryland shooting that news stations did not pay attention to almost at all. The Maryland shooting, the shooter walked in to harm students with a handgun and a pistol, and that just goes to show you that taking away assault rifles not assault, Armalite rifles, ARs, taking those away is not the solution, because you will still have access to a gun. If you have a AR-15, a pistol, a revolver, anything pointed at another person, they can all be equally as deadly. Not the point. The point is, an armed school resource officer that was a cop and was currently working on campus to protect the students was able to stop this shooter. 17 people did not die like in Parkland. The shooter was stopped by an armed campus security officer. So this just goes to show you two things. One, that taking away guns is a solution, actually using them to protect children is a solution. And two, that stricter gun laws do not stop criminals from getting them. I don't know about you, but the last time I saw crack on the shelf at Walmart was never. You don't see heroin on the shelf at Target. It's just not there. It doesn't exist, but people still have access to these things. They are 100% illegal to make, use, and sell, but they're still there. So the same thing will happen with guns. Like I said earlier, the Switzerland situation, Honduras outright banned guns. Citizens cannot go and buy guns willy-nilly, but they still have one of the highest murder rates in the country, in the world. Another fact that I like to point out is the vast majority of mass shootings are handguns. Revolvers or semi-automatic pistols. The vast majority. Yet the target of criticism and the target of these gun control advocates is assault rifles, or ARs that they call assault rifles, the Armalite rifles, and larger guns with heavier magazines. Yet, but that's not the case. Revolvers and pistols make up the vast majority of public shootings, and this is according to both the FBI's public data and the Congressional Research Service that I used earlier. The last thing that I kind of want to talk about is just get into these school shootings. What do I propose as a solution if I don't agree with the solutions proposed by Hogg and his band of survivors and the people of the March for Our Lives? My solutions are different. Well, what I think we need to do is we need to look back into the lives of these shooters. We need to figure out what caused them to do this. Getting the gun is always possible for a criminal. Protecting our students, we need to have armed people on campus. But first, we need to look back into the lives of these people that are committing these crimes. There are some similarities. I've looked back into them. I've done some research. There are some similarities. Almost every single one had the cops called on them before, had reports to suicide groups, FBI groups, criminal watch lists, etc. They've all been exposed to this, some of them with criminal records, with no action. No action was taken. Yet, like the Parkland shooter recently had the cops called on them several times, nothing happened. People were worried that something like this would happen with this kid, and nothing. So we need to pay attention to that. Cops need to take action. We need to have groups and the FBI needs to keep databases. They need to know these people and they need to watch it. We need to prevent these things before they can happen, not wait until they happen and then blame the tool. One of my favorite metaphors is the spoon did not give somebody diabetes, their inability to stop eating ice cream did. So we need to stop blaming the tool, the medium, the gun. We need to figure out what caused this person to go mentally ill, to want to do this to people. Another similarity with these mass shooters, all mass shooters are male. Women don't do it. They haven't done it. No school shooters, mass shooters. All school shooters grew up in a broken home. That's not a coincidence. It's happened too many times. All school shooters did not have a father. That's the great similarity. And I'm not saying that single mothers are the issue, or growing up in a house without a father is going to cause you to do this. But that broken home issue, it needs to be addressed. Divorce rates are higher now than they were before. And another reason, if guns were the problem, I was talking to people, one of my friend's grandfathers was at our school. He was a retired Navy officer, and I was talking to him. He said, well, when he was in high school, almost every guy had a gun rack in his truck. They would go hunting. School shootings didn't happen. There were guns in the parking lot. Students were allowed into the parking lot during lunch. It would have been so easy for them to take their gun in and harm people, but it didn't happen. It's a psychological issue that's been happening over the last few decades that we need to look at. There are warning lights that are coming on with these kids, with these people, that we're not acknowledging. We need to figure out what needs to be done before the shots are fired. We wait too long, it puts lives at risk, and then we blame the tool. It's not the tool. Okay? My school, and then there are several solutions from my side of the spectrum that have been presented. The most famous one that has been acknowledged by the media as almost a laughingstock is that we arm all teachers. Well, I don't really agree with this one. I don't think that it should be done, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. The joke that I've heard is they pick an old lady teacher at the school that's small and frail, and they say, just imagine Mrs. Blank with a gun. Well, okay. Imagine Mrs. Blank walking down the street at night with a gun, and she tries to get mugged, or somebody tries to mug her, and she's able to protect herself. Well, my solution isn't to give all guns to, or all teachers a gun. I think that's excessive, and my reasons for that are it'd be too expensive, taxpayer dollars, it'd be too excessive to train, and most teachers are usually to the left of the aisle, and they wouldn't support it anyway. What I support is almost all schools, especially middle and high schools, have, or they all do, I guess, they have lunch duty aides or campus security or campus supervisors. And I think that these people, there's usually about a dozen, maybe on a large high school campus. Sometimes it's 5 or 6 on a smaller campus, maybe even 1 or 2. I think these people need to be trained in defense. They need to be trained and have access to a weapon. These people need to be able to protect the students, because in the case of an emergency, these are the ones that go and lock the doors, windows, and gates. These are the ones that are already outside their rooms, making sure that every other child is safe. If they're armed, they might be able to stop the problem, and the number of victims will go down. Like in Maryland, the school resource officer, my school has one. I don't necessarily think one person's enough, but I think that every school should have at least one trained armed person on campus. There's actually a large group near where I live in Southern California of retired military personnel, retired veterans, and retired police officers that would be willing to be a school resource protection officer. And there is a high school near the city of Menifee where a retired cop actually acts as security on campus with a gun. No longer in uniform, works for the school, and protects the children. That I agree with as a solution, a great solution. So, kind of after going over this, that's kind of where I'm gonna stop this first episode. If you enjoyed it, that's great. I'd love for you to like it, share it with as many people as you can. I want you to throw down in the comments any questions, any topics you want me to go over. I'm gonna have an email linked in the description. I'll have it on my bio and the accounts on all my other social medias like that you might have, like Twitter or Instagram. I'll have an email. It's going to be the drenkangle@gmail, I think it is. And you can email me any topics, any questions, concern, anything you agreed with, disagree with. Let me know how this was. Give me recommendations. And again, I thank you for joining me. This was, a lot of fun. And again, let me know. So this is the Drenk Angle. My name is Caden Drenk. Thanks for watching.